Have you ever heard the term silent majority? Have you felt like you could do more? Do you have a desire to help with local politics or make a difference in how the government operates? Is it overwhelming to think about? Those questions define me. They were me, but not anymore. This podcast is about our voice, our questions, our feelings, and working together to make a difference for the future. We believe that we must fight for our liberty or lose our freedoms. Join me as I speak to our friends and neighbors, our politicians and leaders, and discover ways that we all can make a difference in the direction of the United States of America. Hello and welcome to the show. Thanks for tuning in. All your feedback is much appreciated. And as always, at least I feel that way, that I continue to deliver some great and interesting guests. Today I have Cassandra Spencer on the show. How are you today, Cassandra?
I'm doing awesome. How are you, Jim?
I'm good. For somebody that follows you on Instagram, you are all over the place. Your book just hit the best-selling list. And I just don't know how you keep it all under control and know where you're going next.
Well, I will say that it's definitely gotten pretty hectic here the past few weeks, and it's only going to get crazier going into 2022.
Yeah, with success and everything that you're doing, I would imagine so. It's and seriously, I really appreciate your prompt on the call. I was sitting there thinking, this woman's very busy. I hope I get her on time, and you were right there waiting for me. So thank you so much. Without delaying your story, I'd love to hear some of your background, and then we can dig into how you became a whistleblower and then undercover for Project Veritas and all these other things, and ultimately writing your book.
Awesome. Yeah. So one of the reasons why I think I'm good about being on time is originally in college, while I was a single mom, I was on an ROTC scholarship, and I was a military reserve stationed back in Hawaii, where I'm originally from. So car accident ended my military career. So I found myself eventually through a series of events in Austin, Texas, where I worked at, I thought was a dream job, getting hired as a contractor at Facebook. I was like, hey, yeah, this is going to be my stepping stone to get in at Facebook. And, you know, in college, I used to get in trouble for being on Facebook all the time.
Yeah.
And so I had had a Facebook account since 2004 when it was like a few private universities. So I had one of the first like few thousand Facebook accounts. And so I thought this was going to be this like dream job. And eventually I started seeing things that seemed a little off as I started working there. And eventually I, investigated it more and more, noticed a pattern. Became a whistleblower, went to Project Veritas with this information, and then obviously got fired from my job for Facebook for whistleblowing. Sure. And went on to become an undercover journalist for Project Veritas and getting to help tell other whistleblower stories. So
tell me, well, first of all, let's get kind of some context with the dates that you were working at Facebook way back when. That's obviously when it was newer, but what year time frame was that?
So I was a contractor at Facebook from 2017 to 2018.
Okay. So they had a pretty big following. A lot of people were on Facebook. I'm old enough where I got on Facebook when it started, which seems like forever ago. Okay. So here you are working, you're doing your job. What did you notice that was different or stood out? Like, wow, that doesn't seem right.
So I actually worked as in the intellectual property department. So I dealt with like copyright and trademark claims primarily. Mm-hmm. One day I got in a ticket from some conservative outlet. It was a smaller independent outlet. And I noticed when I was going through, because, obviously when you get in a ticket, you have to look at the party who's making the claim as well as the one who's the content is on. And so I noticed on the conservative page that there was an odd note that said IA live action deboost live distribution. And it was in the account notes section. And it was a code I had never seen on any account before. Mm-hmm. And I was like, that's kind of weird, but you move on. You're like, okay, because I would be looking at thousands of pieces of content a day.
Sure.
And so, and every once in a while I would get in a ticket from a political influencer. And I noticed I kept seeing this code on the back end of specifically conservative pages. Mm-hmm. Like I saw it on Steven Crowder's page. I saw it on Mike Cernovich's page. the Daily Caller's page. And so eventually you notice to yourself, like, this is a pattern. Like, it's only appearing on the conservative pages. Like,
Sure.
I'm looking at liberal pages too that are also independent, like the Young Turks or like Colin Kaepernick. And I'm like, I don't see this anywhere on their pages. So one day I saw a tweet from James O'Keefe, who I was following on Twitter. And he said that if you're on the inside of one of these companies, to reach out to Veritas tips at protonmail.com, which is their tip line. And I did, and it just kind of went from there.
It's interesting because the majority of us are on Facebook and Twitter and all these platforms for fun, for connectivity to friends and family. I loved it for my grandparents because they could see my kids and they lived, 5 states away, and it just was a neat little thing for them. But as big business and big tech and politics really started utilizing those platforms, it started changing the reality of who we are and why we go there and what's important to us. So your discoveries are more important than most people would imagine.
Well, and that was the thing it was really a hard decision at the time. I apologize for my dog.
Nothing we're going to do about it now.
Right. I was like, well, that's what happens. But so it was one of those things where I knew that what I saw was wrong, and especially as somebody who had been in the military, I joined the military out of a desire to, really experience things firsthand and wanting to do the right thing. And so it was this really kind of pivotal choice where I had to decide whether I'm going to, just kind of keep my head down and just keep working my job. My job was comfortable. It was easy. Or am I going to do something about it, even though, it put me in quite a bit of peril, including the moment that I did get fired. And then afterwards, not having a job, having to go on food stamps for a little bit. Mm-hmm. And really, but it ended up being absolutely worth it because then, like I said, I went on to work at Project Veritas as an undercover journalist, and then got to help tell other whistleblower stories and just all the things that have happened. And now the book, obviously.
I'm so glad that you were honest enough to just briefly mention even going on food stamps, right? I don't think people understand I don't want to use the word battle, but in my mind, the battle that we're in right now of conservatives against liberals, against the cancellation of our voices in so many arenas, that in order for us to get back to some normalcy, we're all going to have to make some type of personal sacrifice, whatever that looks like, whether it's less time in your day because you've got to work at night to help, promote a conservative agenda, or in your case, losing a job and being on food stamps so that you can survive. You had to make a conscious choice between what was right and what was wrong, and knew that there was consequences for that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And like I mentioned, in college, I was a single mom and I was on an ROTC scholarship. I waited tables. I had never had to go on food stamps. That was the first time in my life that I had to do that. And it was mortifying and extremely humbling. Yeah. Because I knew that I was in a position where in that moment, I could not be proud. It was like, and it was a few weeks. I found another job because I'm an adult, but, it was an unexpected thing when I did get fired. I knew that I was walking, a tightrope and I was playing a dangerous game, but of course you don't expect it necessarily in that moment when it happens.
Well, as somebody that's been paying taxes the last 37 years, I'm happy that my tax dollars went to somebody like yourself doing the right thing. And enough of that, right? So, it's almost unfathomable that something that we use for entertainment can be such a scary tool like Facebook and these social media channels for all of our lives. Can you explain the magnitude of those platforms and what they're capable of doing? Is that okay?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So when I was at Facebook back in 2017, 2018, they had approximately 2 billion users worldwide.
Wow.
So you have to think that is a massive portion of the global population that is on Facebook. And by design, they have kind of made themselves the new town square. They touted themselves as a place where, in addition to being able to share family things like you were talking about, where people could, have discussions about some of these serious issues that we as societies face, especially as, technology and everything just rapidly changes our global landscape, and we're more connected with people around the world than ever before. But that also gives these companies a terrifying amount of power over, using, whether it be using algorithms to control what content you do or don't see, the ability to censor even the president of the United States of America. At any point, people can be, canceled, and for, silly tweets that were made, a decade ago sometimes. Mm-hmm. And I think that these technology companies, as much as we complain about politicians, you want to know who elected Mark Zuckerberg or Jack Dorsey? Literally no one.
Yeah.
So I think it's something that is, and it has become part of our national discourse, where we have to decide the role that these technology companies play in our lives. And it's very important that we kind of start tackling this now, because I think they have grown out of control.
So what do you say to somebody that says, oh, come on, Cassandra, this is, it's just Facebook. It's no big deal. The president has other outlets where he can speak at, or these conservatives have other places where they can talk at. You're just making a big thing out of it. And I'm going to expand on that just a little bit more. I don't think people realize how much time they do spend on Facebook and social media channels, and how much of an influence it has over them. Can you talk a little bit about that from being on the inside, about what people's usage is on these platforms?
Oh, it's huge. I mean, as somebody, I'm 34 years old. I started like at the beginning of the social media generation, right? Like with MySpace, like towards the end of high school and then going into college. And back then it was like, who was in your top 8, like that would cause actual fights within your friend group. So you see it starting there. And so particularly for people who are, kind of, I would say late Gen X to millennials and younger, their whole lives, my entire life was documented on Facebook and MySpace. Like you could see everything I had done from my junior year of high school up through now. I mean, our whole lives are being presented on social media. And I think with COVID this past year in particular, even more so, because now you had a situation where, we're being discouraged or sometimes flat out, not allowed to meet with each other in person and have these conversations face to face. So now we can only rely on these digital platforms. So it's very serious if that's your only outlet, especially like I had a 90-year-old relative that was her only way to, communicate with family and whatever, because, she can't get around, and that was her way of socializing. Mm-hmm. Was on Facebook. So I think it is very important, and it's not just, silly social media as much as, a lot of it is silly, and you can be as silly or as serious as you want to be. Especially in the age of COVID, I think that's underscored how important these digital ways to connect really are.
Yeah. I was a fan of the Netflix show, The Social Dilemma. I thought it seemed to be very informative. I don't know what your feelings are on that show. Did you happen to see it?
I've heard about it. It's one of those things where people kept sending it to me to watch. And I would always be like, why am I going to watch this? I said, I literally work in this industry. Yeah. So I didn't want to, because I was like, I deal with this all day. When I come home, I don't necessarily want to deal with it.
Well, I'm going to encourage you to watch it, because the same thing was happening to me, having a voice on a podcast show. Everybody kept sending it to me, and I'm very active in social media. I didn't watch it for a long time. And then finally I did. I went, wow. And this is why I bring it up with you, it talks about how these social media platforms feed us what we want, right? If we like steak and potatoes, they're going to give us steak and potatoes all day long. If we're a vegan, we're going to get vegan all day long, and they track your algorithms, and then that's what they're feeding me. So in a sense, it distorts what reality is, because I'm only getting what I like and what I want, as opposed to everything that's out there. And I watched the show and I thought, wow, that seems very possible, because I say something and then next thing I know, it shows up on my Instagram feed, right?
Right.
Coming from the inside, I mean, there's a lot of reality to that, right?
Oh, 100%. And what's interesting